Welcome, everybody, to another segment of The Radical Imagination. I'm Michael Pelias, one of the co-hosts. To my left is Peter Bratsis, my other co-host. And we are going to have a very, very interesting and timely discussion today on a program entitled Refugees Welcome. And this is the title of a video where we will come close to ending the program with today, taken from Hassan Oswald, the brother of one of our guests today, both of whom I'll introduce in a second. And we are going to begin first introducing our two guests, both photojournalists, another a photojournalist and filmmaker. To my immediate left is Fahrinisa Oswald. Do you want to say, introduce yourself? That'd be great. Yes. Please.
Yes, my name is Fahrinisa Oswald, and I am a photojournalist from New York.
And to her left, Harriet.
My name is Harriet Dedman. I'm a photojournalist and filmmaker from the UK, and Fahrinisa and I have worked together on a number of projects.
Okay. Both of our guests today spent multiple months on the island of Lesvos, which, at least to my mind, is certainly famous for the poet, the great Greek lyric poet, Sappho. This is where she was with her entourage. Although the meaning of the island has taken on a very, very, very different turn in our modern times, and particularly in recent history, with the refugee problem that we're seeing all over Europe. It used to be the specter of communism was haunting Europe. Now it's the specter of the refugees. Seems to be the major problem facing both the European Union, the European people, and the refugees themselves. So we're going to begin today by taking a little trip to the island. We're going to begin with some video clips. Lesvos, and also a landscape of the island, as well as some photographs. And both Fahrinisa and Harriet will give us commentary as we go along on these videos and especially the photos. So can we go to the videos, please?
So the shores of Turkey are just 6 miles away from the island of Lesvos.
Refugees from Syria, Afghanistan and Iraq walk along the winding roads to the nearest transit camp.
Over 590,000 refugees have arrived on the island since January 2015. More continue to arrive every day. Yesterday, 1,200 landed on the shores.
They are supported by volunteers from around the world. Many teams come from Spain, Sweden, the Netherlands, the UK.
Including a number of lifeboats which have now arrived as of November, which help to shepherd the boats in from across the waters, allowing safe passage, but of course none of the volunteers are allowed to participate in actually the element of trafficking.
As you can see, Turkey is a very short journey across the water.
Our photographs and video were shot over the course of November and January, so November 2015 and January of this year. The majority of them are from the Limanziki beach, which is the shortest point from Turkey to Greece, where a group of Greek lifeguards, Lifeguard Hellas, man the waters day and night, assisting with the landings of the refugees.
Here, of course, is the beautiful landscape that you did.
Absolutely.
Such a beautiful job.
So the sun is setting over the Aegean Sea, where a graveyard of boats sort of dot along the shores, and life jackets and discarded items of clothing and blankets that are left by those who have already previously made this journey. The environmental impact of the crisis is something that is very much real and has not been reported at all.
And now we'll have a few photographs as well from the opening segment. Yes, and you'll do a commentary on these as well. Okay. Do we have the photos? The slideshow? Okay. There.
So these are boats arriving. On our first day in November, 60 boats arrived that day over a period of sort of 24 hours and all different shapes and sizes, including a boat once bearing up to 250 refugees, which you can see here now in that photograph there. They arrive in all sorts of states of shock and cold. Some have walked for miles from the borders of Afghanistan to Turkey. We've heard of stories of amputations, of those the conditions have just been so bad and poor footwear throughout the entire journey, who arrive in Greece and lose their limbs. The stories coming off the island are shocking and personal and very deep and individual narratives for every single person arriving.
It's heartbreaking because when they arrive, they often think that they've made it, that this is the end. And, you know, it's hard to tell them that this is still only probably just the beginning. They have a long way to go before they reach their final destination in Central Europe. And they have no idea how difficult it's actually going to be, walking for days often. And it's winter, which is something that a lot of them are not used to from their home countries. And so they come very unprepared, barefoot, or if they're not barefoot, they don't have proper shoes, they don't have proper coats. They don't even have raincoats, and it's been raining quite a lot. So it's sad to realize that they don't know how difficult it still is going to be for them.
Very interesting. One of you from the UK, the other
Yes.
from New York City and environs, right?
Yes.
What began your interest in this? What motivated you to take on such a, you know, in my sense, an extremely ambitious project, and something that, you know, also is on the level of a dangerous project too. So we can maybe talk in both of those registers, ambitious and dangerous, together. No.
I've always been drawn to covering conflict, and not in the sense of, you know, the glamorous war journalist, conflict journalist, more in the sense of covering what happens to the people on the outskirts of conflict. And so that normally is women and children that either get left behind or that are forced to flee. When I saw over the summer that a lot of refugees started to arrive in Lesvos in particular, I immediately knew that that's where I had to go if I wanted to continue covering this type of story. And so over 3 months, I started planning a trip, and my first trip was in October. And the moment I got there, I knew that what I was doing was the right thing, that these people who had no means of telling their own stories, I then had the opportunity to tell their story for them. And it's for me, it's remained the same. Even though less have been arriving in the past couple of months, it's still just as important to be there to document their journey and their story.
Interesting. Did you go with a preconceived framework, or did you let your intuition be your guide as you went along?
I had
and
no
process
idea.
took over? Okay,
Yeah, I had no
interesting.
idea what I was
Good,
doing.
good.
I landed. I had contacted a couple of journalists before I had arrived, who I knew that were there. I didn't know them, but you know, I met up with them once I was there, and I rented a car, I rented a hotel room, and I hit the beach because I knew that's where they were arriving. And so it was pretty much figuring out what to do and where to go next on a hour by hour basis.
You know, now this is not an obscure news story. The refugee
No.
crisis is probably one of the 2, 3, 4
Absolutely.
main stories of the last year or so.
Yes.
What did you think? I mean, 2, 3 people from Columbia University journalism students going there, in contrast to Reuters and the New York Times and all these major news services with many resources. What did you think you could do that would go beyond, or you know, or be in addition to what the mainstream media?
Yeah, I think
is
it's
providing?
interesting. I think there is a misconception that there are hordes of photographers and journalists on the beaches and cameras in the faces of all these refugees, and that was certainly not our experience. And we knew that there were more stories beyond the bedlam of the beaches and all these people arriving, and
Right.
there are real stories there that are not being reported on. And yes, people have seen now endless photographs of the landings or of refugees shivering in the cold, but no one has seen stories about where these people have, the journeys that they've taken up to that point, the backgrounds that they've had within Syria or within Iraq or within Iran, depending on where they're from. And also, we've been back now between us sort of 3 times, and we're going back in a couple of weeks for our 4th trip. And we found that not many journalists who have reported on the crisis have returned, and people fly in for 2 or 3 days. They get the shots that they want of the boats landing, and that is happening, like we said, sort of up to 60 times a day. But then they leave, and we've been picked up by a number of networks now because they know that we're on the ground and we've got a huge network there, and we're consistent, and I think our reporting has been and our photographs have been much more in depth than anything else coming out so far.
So in a way, you have confronted the dominant sensationalism of
Right.
contemporary journalism on this issue.
Absolutely.
Yes.
And I think we were frustrated
Right.
by the messages coming
Right.
out of, all these men fleeing and women being sort of left by themselves. And there is definitely drama there, and it's an extremely dramatic and extremely emotional situation. But there's also there's elements of happiness and
success.
excitement and
Right.
prospects and hope.
One thing I'd like to interject, I mean, in dominant U.S. media, we're always at the sensationalist level.
Yeah.
It seems to be the case in terms of also most of the European dominant media as well.
Right.
Although I have noticed that in the United States, RT as a station has, multiple programs on the refugees,
Right.
and multiple things. Could you comment on that? Why would it be that a state-run and owned TV station that Vladimir Putin himself authorizes would be so involved in this? Any thoughts about this?
I mean, I'm not
as a
directly familiar
journalist?
with that particular
Have you
coverage.
seen? Yeah.
I don't know
Some of the
either.
coverage. It's kind of interesting to me that you would get this out of the formerly Soviet Union,
Yeah.
now Russian Federation, and from
I think the Russians know Greece
Yes,
very well. I
right.
think it's an extremely popular holiday destination for many people within Russia. So I think there's a fascination within Russia as to what's happening to these
Right.
islands. And obviously, as we all know, there's a big sort of involvement in Syria at the moment as well.
Right.
And
yes.
I'm not sure. I
Okay,
can't comment
I
on
just,
that.
to me, it's a kind of an anomaly to the dominant, that you would have
Right.
this station, in cable TV in the United States in English,
Yeah.
in which they're almost nightly running a program in which they go to various camps and,
Okay.
have dealt with the problem, at least in a more descriptive and analytical sense
Yeah.
than 99% of the other dominant media channels, at least in terms of visual media.
Yeah.
Yes.
I mean,
Yeah.
we can definitely say that
Yes.
the level and depth of reporting coming out of Lesvos has been fairly sort of one-dimensional.
Yeah,
Right.
and I think because we spent so much time there consistently going back, we're able to find the stories that others who don't spend the time miss. We found one Syrian refugee who arrived in June and then with a Greek partner set up a restaurant. And, that's a story that you would easily miss if you spend only 2-3 days there. And those are also happy stories that mainstream media perhaps doesn't necessarily want out there.
And who do they cater to? To the refugees themselves?
Refugees, volunteers, some local Greeks have now started getting into it. It's the only halal restaurant and the only Syrian restaurant on the island, so it's a bit strange, I think, at first for some people. But it's become quite a hub for the volunteers and the refugees, definitely.
And the landscapes and faces of Mytilene, which is the sort of the capital of Lesvos, and the main port where the airport is as well, has sort of changed forever. And you've got hordes of refugees walking around the streets, and of course, a restaurant and a hub to support them is inevitable because they're a dominant population now on the island. So,
Sure.
yeah.
And you had some interesting run-ins with some of the groups that have gone there to cater to the refugees. You came across some Christian missionaries.
Now that we're on the level of food, we might as well.
You had a run-in with some vegans apparently, and also you saw some
Yeah.
Christian missionaries.
Yeah, I mean, shall I tackle the missionaries and you can tackle the vegans? So I think with any sort of crisis like this, you have a lot of different interest groups coming from all over the world, and certainly the majority of voluntary groups on the island sort of are based sort of groups of people who are from the Muslim faith. But there are definitely people there with different agendas now, and we have met a few missionaries who are hoping to tackle the subject of religion with those getting off the boats and it's an interesting time to do it.
Yes, yes.
But they're definitely there. So, but that's history, right? That's happened all over the world for centuries.
There's a great image in and we'll go to the vegans too, but there's a great image in a Werner Herzog film, Agira, Wrath of God, where the Christian missionaries give the Indians the Bible, put it in their hands, and the Indian puts it up to his ear. Can't hear. So very, on this level. Yes, please. Yeah.
So there's a vegan camp now that's been set up near the port. None of these camps are really official. They don't really have permission to be there. They just, volunteers come and they set up, and then refugees start to come and fill the camps. And we just happened to run into them one day, and we had been serving some of the halal food from the restaurant to the refugees, and it had meat in it. And we were told quite forcibly to perhaps leave the camp and not serve the food in the camp to these refugees because it was not in line with their ideology of being vegan. And so it just made us wonder, in a crisis like this, in an emergency situation, are we to be forcing our ideals on people, keeping food away from them that they've grown up with? I mean, this soup was made by a Syrian. We were serving it to Syrian refugees, and we were being told not to do that because it had meat in it.
And the refugees themselves wanted to eat, and they flatly ignored the wishes of the camp members, I think. But it was an interesting dynamic, and it definitely made us all sort of stop.
Sure. And that's a story
shocked.
they don't cover in the New York Times.
Oh,
they don't
never.
get to the level
That's
of
a scoop.
yes, it's a scoop.
Right here
That
on
is a very
MNN.
good scoop. Right.
Yeah.
Very
Now,
interesting.
one thing that's happened since you've returned is that the volunteer groups in the islands have been nominated for the Nobel Prize,
Right.
as you know.
Right.
And you'd commented before that you found the lifeguards to be especially well organized and professional.
So we first met Lifeguard Hellas, which is a group of lifeguards, the majority of whom are based out of Athens, who they set up sort of in October time, I think.
The first week of November is when they first set up on the island.
And we met them about a week, 2 weeks into their sort of initial operations there. They've taken over a beach. They've been given the permission. It was originally a private beach, but as we saw, most of those images were from that beach. It's the closest point to the Turkish coast.
And later in the program, we'll see photos of some of these
Of the camps.
volunteers
Yes,
in the
of
camps
course,
as well.
absolutely.
Yeah,
And
good.
so they man the beach 24 hours a day. There's always someone there over the night shift, and they've helped thousands and thousands of refugees to land safely, and they're their first point of contact. They give them warm clothes, they give them food, they
have
shuttle
medical
them
attention.
to the camps. There's always a doctor present on the beach. And it's really the only all-Greek organisation operating out of Lesvos, and there's now over 60 or 70 international organisations there. Some you've heard of, Doctors Without Borders,
Greenpeace.
IRC's there, but then some you haven't. I mean, there was one, which was a band of brothers, literally called Five Brothers and a Friend.
Yeah, Five Brothers and a Friend.
And they were walking around with their vest saying Five Brothers and a Friend, and that's literally what they were. So it's great.
And the lifeguards apparently are so successful that the smugglers charge more money to
Right,
take the
so-
refugees to those beaches?
Yeah.
Now that the smugglers know that there are people waiting on the other side for the refugees, they consider it a safer journey. That has nothing to do with what happens in the water between the two countries.
Yes.
But because they think it's a safer journey, they then turn to the refugees and say, it's going to be safer now, so we're going to charge you more.
You're going business class now.
Yeah.
There were always different tiers of
Right.
pricing
Yeah.
because
Interesting.
the majority of boats are those big inflatables that you see,
Yes.
and I think the
Those are the
standard
more
price
dangerous
is
ones.
about $1,200 to $1,500 per person for that passage.
Yeah.
But then the wooden boats, which they effectively just get from scrap yards in Turkey, they're definitely no more seaworthy. But the smugglers charge the refugees more for those types of boats on the perceived notion that they're safer. And we've heard that they're now also tiering their pricing based on which beaches they're being sent to.
As well as
So-
what time of day or night that
Right.
they're being sent. If they go at night, they get a big discount.
Discount,
If they go during a storm, it's like 50% off. And you'll find that the Syrian refugees actually happen to have more money in general than all the other refugees, and so they'll go during the day. The ones that come at night are the Afghans, the Pakistanis, the Bangladeshis, who don't have the same amount of money, who can only afford to go during a massive storm. And the likelihood of them making it in one piece is so much less.
And we've been there when boats full of just children have arrived in the darkness as well. And a lot of children are getting dislocated from families and displaced and orphaned. But they're still sort of following the mass of refugees on this big trail to Turkey. And then they get packed in the boats in the evening and literally fending for themselves. And most of these people, it's important to realise, some of them have never seen the sea before. Most of them, if not all of them, have never been on boats before. Very, very few, if not any, have ever driven a boat before. And the smugglers are not sort of operating a ferry service back and forth. It is literally providing a boat to these groups of refugees, sometimes using a gun to nominate who the driver's going to be, and then they just have to go.
Pointing them, say,
Point
go.
them in the
And they push
direction.
off.
And there's sometimes like
Right.
shortages of fuel. I
Right.
mean, that's a really common
Right.
occurrence halfway across the
Right.
sea.
And you know, when you pack a boat with 60 people and it's only meant for 15, you are going to run out of fuel halfway,
Right.
Especially if you hit
Absolutely.
waves and
Sure.
a current.
Yeah.
So lots of boats get stranded halfway through.
I'd like to go back to a comment you made during the introduction when you said to most of these people, it's like the end, right? They at least they're experiencing this as their end of life, and you said, no, it's, possibly a beginning, right?
Right.
And maybe you could comment a little more about that, your experience in talking to, many of the refugees, what you've gathered from that, and also, the level of hope that is present, and what would encourage the hope, but in the beginning, what kind of hope or hopelessness is operative, upon arrival, since this
Yeah.
is one of the, themes of today, the arrivals
Well,
first.
it's actually such a tough journey. It's a very dangerous journey, that 9 miles, 6 miles from Turkey to Greece. When they arrive, they're really thankful and full of hope, like they've made it. And rightfully so, they have made it. They've made it past the most dangerous part. That's not the most difficult part, though. And I think that a lot of refugees, they haven't planned past Greece. A lot of refugees arrive and say, where am I?
Yeah.
And that's the most heartbreaking, because you realize that's the level of knowledge that they have at this point about their journey. They don't even know where they've landed. They've just been pushed into a boat and told, go. See those lights over there? Go.
And you'll see, as we've got some photographs of the camp, and you'll see
Right.
there are maps sort of placed up on the walls because, they
That's-
don't know where they are and they don't know where they're going to go. And it's, the UNHCR have done a great job in terms of everything's up there in Arabic, and there's support to help with that side of planning of the rest of their journey. But it's just a bit of a mess. And when you have so many people arriving on a daily basis, it's not as if that much care and attention can be provided to each individual group coming across. They land, they have attention for about 5 minutes and are given food and blankets, but then they're bussed off to the camps and another batch arrives. So it's a very overwhelming situation to be in.
Maybe we can see the photographs from the camps.
Yeah, that might be a good idea. Maybe we can go to the photographs of the camps and also the volunteers, and we can do a commentary on those too, and then maybe end with the vultures, what we're going to call vultural capitalism. Yeah.
So this is in sort of one of the first transit camps where they're first shuttled to, and as you can see, the maps are on the wall for them to plan the rest of their journey.
And this is Moria, the biggest camp where they actually go to register for the next leg of their journey, which is to take the ferry from Lesvos to Athens and then onward to the rest of Europe. You can see the conditions that they're meant to live in. Those are just tents that they pitch. They are not protected by the wind and the rain.
Many young children are travelling by themselves. You've got groups of men who have sort of escaped Syria because of all the conscription that's going on there. It's a difficult scene to look at, and you see children who are living this very weird and warped childhood. We were there in Moria one day in absolute torrential rain, and we were lucky. We were only there really for half an hour, and we could get back into the shelter of our car. But just to see all these people huddled outside, soaking wet again, with no clothes to change into, was pretty heartbreaking.
Families often plan the next leg of their journey from the camps, looking at the maps, and also they're constantly receiving updates via social media about the borders that are closing or the ones that are reopening, and they're always changing their routes. They'll look at the map, they'll say, we want to go to Germany, how are we going to go, and which borders are open, and they'll make that decision together from the camp.
Right.
Whether or not they can actually complete that journey is really up to luck, because as they start out, it will take days for them to make it. As they start out, borders will open and close again, and they'll be forced to detour around the closure of a border.
I'd like to just make a comment about the tents. You know, during the massive homeless crisis in New York City, both of you probably too young to remember, but in the late 80s and the early 90s, there was a lot of talk about tent cities. There used to be a tent city near the Manhattan Bridge where people would live, right? I'm just wondering, and this became a kind of fashionable thing to talk about and also a very serious thing to talk about. What do you do with a homeless population, right, at a particular moment? And of course, architects, you know, of progressive stripes would begin to, you know, design sort of tent cities, right, as ideals for these kind of situations. Has there been any talk of this that you know of in Lesvos or at other points of entry?
There's two
yes,
stages
please.
to it. I
Yes,
think
okay.
in Lesvos, they were winterproofing the camps when we were there, and you have volunteers who are architects and electricians who have come in and are building more sort of semi-permanent structures. So that is happening, but it's slow, and money is obviously an issue. But you know more than me, but IKEA have also done something, haven't they?
IKEA?
Yeah,
Oh, okay.
they've designed a shelter of sorts. I haven't seen any of them on the island of Lesvos. I've just read articles and heard talk about it. They're lightweight, but they're very protective. They're much sturdier than the tents that we see in those photos, which are just the cloth that blows away in the wind. And
Are these tax-deductible donations from the IKEA Corporation?
You know, I don't know.
purchased
We don't
by
know.
the Greek government, supposedly to be paid back by the EU.
One thing that is happening is a lot of recycling is going on. So
That's interesting. Okay.
there are
Yeah.
hundreds of thousands of life vests left on the island, and what volunteers have started to do is to take these life vests and use them on the bottom underneath the tents as kind of cushioning, so that the tent isn't directly on the hard, cold ground. They've started to make backpacks out of the rubber boats that are left discarded on the beaches. There's not enough room for all of this waste, and so what we're starting to see is a trend of recycling.
And also to support the refugees, and I think we've mentioned it before, but there are two girls on the island who are self-proclaimed the dirty girls, and they go around the beaches picking up all of the discarded clothing, wash it, dry it, so they have boxes then of new fresh clothes ready for the incoming refugees. And the management
sounds like a very good new rock group. Or new,
exactly.
rock
The dirty
star
girls,
group.
absolutely.
Maybe they should be.
But it's important, and I think I mean we'll look at the photographs of the volunteers later.
Okay.
But I think there's definitely there's a hierarchy within sort of the voluntary groups in terms of there's a lot of people who want to be seen to be on the beaches and taking selfies, and it's definitely sort of, for want of a better word, seen to be perhaps a bit sexier to be welcoming the boats coming in, but there is a real need for more sort of, well, for the less glamorous jobs like the washing of the clothes to be done. And I think the real sort of heroes on the island, and most of them are sort of the local Greeks, are the people who are behind the scenes doing the things which are effectively keeping the wheels oiled on the island.
So we can have the Spice Girls for the vegans,
right?
And,
exactly.
the dirty girls for the laundry. Good. Yeah. Well, maybe we could go to the photos of the volunteers, since they've come up as well. I think this is great.
This is a typical landing. The volunteers will kind of go out into the water and wait for the boat to come, and they'll grab onto it before it hits the surface, and they'll make sure that the engine is off so that it doesn't
and the volunteers have divided up the beaches. You saw that picture of the map just then, and each voluntary group, because there are now so many on the island, have effectively been allocated a section of the coastline, because there was a bit of division and miscommunication between the teams.
Interesting.
But many volunteers, like this gentleman featured, have been there since September time, and are still there.
This is lifeguard Hellas, a few of their volunteers.
And then again, you can see the lifeboats, which are now beginning to feature a bit more.
Could you talk a little bit about the Nobel Prize in terms of this?
So
kind of interesting for
three
our
people.
viewers. Yes,
so it's not the entire sort of population of the Greek islands. It is a grandmother who's been very sort of very involved on the beaches. It's a fisherman who has also been very involved in terms of the rescues, and it's Susan Sarandon have been the three nominees as the representatives
Well,
of
at
the
least
Greek
one New
islands.
Yorker got in there. Yeah.
Because she visited, I think it was the week after we were there, she was in November, she was out
Right.
on the beaches and
in the
Fantastic.
boats.
helping to
Yeah.
promote,
Yeah.
which is obviously extremely
Right.
brilliant work. But
So
I
they've
think
been
they're the
nominated.
representative of the larger the larger
Yeah.
Greek population. I think they're not announced until the summer, the prizes. So or the,
Yeah, it'll
even
be
the autumn,
it'll be a few more
so-
months, I think.
So we'll see what
Still lots of work to be done there.
Now, did any of the refugees express any desire to come here?
To the U.S.,
Yes.
Yeah.
none of them want to come to the U.S.
None of them want to come.
No.
This is very interesting.
They don't even really
Any
necessarily.
speculation on why so? And from your perspective or in your
I
conversations?
mean, it might be that they've given up on coming. I mean, most of them want to go to Germany or Sweden. Those are the two top sort of destinations of choice.
Well,
There's
both
a-
have
there's a
national
network of
healthcare
people
and that free education.
Who know
and-
each other. And
Yeah, they often go
Yes.
to countries where they have family members or at least friends. You
Correct.
rarely find someone that is just going and doesn't know where he's going and doesn't have
Yeah.
anyone there at the end. There have been a couple of those, mostly Afghans. But the U.S. is much further away. There is this sentiment of hatred towards refugees that they definitely feel. But it's not only the U.S. You know, the refugees that I've spoken to and asked about Syria and about going back or what are their plans once they reach Europe, they don't want to leave their country. They didn't want to have to do that, and they would go back if they had the choice, if there were no war, and if
So people expect they'll be displaced for some amount of time, and then they'll go back after 1, 2, 3, 4 years.
I think a lot of
whenever
them
the
really
war
expect
finishes.
to do that.
And these are educated, tuned-in people who read the internet, read the news reports, and
Right.
they're really aware of what is going on and the general sentiment towards their arrivals. But I mean, we've met so many sort of young men who are coming over to continue their sort of university education, biochemical engineers and poets and artists who just can't be in Syria anymore. So.
Is there a pointedness at the United States for producing the situation or being partially responsible for this moment?
Yeah, I mean,
I'm just
Yeah.
wondering what the sentiment would be and how
Yes.
articulate that sentiment is in terms
Sure.
of, we know as
Yeah.
people of maybe the left or center left, whatever,
Well,
I
Donald
think.
Trump.
Right.
Donald Trump
Right.
notes often that U.S. foreign policy has destabilized the
Sure.
region and led to, so it's not
Right,
just the people on the left,
That's
Donald
true.
Trump
right,
as well.
right, and it has. And
Recognizes the dynamic of what's been happening.
we, as well as other world powers, have had a
Yes.
massive hand to play in
Yeah.
this. And the refugees coming over, they're people, they're humans, they're well educated, they know as well the role that everyone plays in this. And I think that the refugees that we've talked to, there are no expectations from them. They're not traveling to Europe and expect that they deserve, like they're going to get a job or have a better life. They're running because they don't want to die. We spoke to 4 young cousins, actually, all men, and we asked them why they were going. And one of them, Mohammed, simply said, I don't want to die, and I don't want to add fuel to the fire. I don't want to fight my countrymen. And so that's why I'm running. So it's really less that they want a better life in the sense that they want a better job and better housing. They don't want to die. That's what it is.
And I think this is something that the Western press particularly is focused on, and the majority of people coming over are still men. I think that it's up to sort of 44% now are men coming over, but then of course women and children are following. The reason why it was sort of the majority of men coming over in the first instance was, which makes sense, they were sent over to pave the way and sent back for their family to come afterwards, and they just didn't know where they were going to go. But also this issue of conscription for young men sort of from the age of 16 through to, 35, who are being pulled into so many different directions by all the different armed forces now occupying sort of different territory within Syria, and they don't want to fight their friends. They don't want to fight for Assad. They certainly don't want to join ISIS, but they don't necessarily believe in what the Free Army is doing either. And it's much more sort of a nuanced situation, and I think people haven't appreciated that difference, and it's very easy to say, why are these men not standing up and fighting for their country? And in the United States, we would fight for our country, we wouldn't let this happen. But you can't fight for your country if there's no organized sort of institutional force to fight for. And it's not to say they won't go back, and it's not to say that they won't sort of get their education and then go back and help in the rehabilitation of their country. I think that's very much most of them want to do that, but it's not as easy as people think to just stay there and resist what's going on.
I wanted to ask also, have you built, real friendships with some of the people there that you're in contact all the time? And
with refugees
not
and
as
with
embedded reporters or photojournalists, but as real,
Yes, on a very human level, with both refugees
good.
and volunteers. I have on my WhatsApp a bunch of refugees who text me now and then, oh, we've made it to Germany safe, or we're changing towns, and they'll send me pictures of their new camp quarters. And because we're continuously going back to the island, we've kept in contact with a lot of people, a lot of volunteers and doctors on the ground there. Yeah. And it's actually quite special.
I think it's hard. I mean, you definitely see the people that have been there the whole time, and there is PTSD present amongst the voluntary groups as well. And people, it's important for people to come in and out, and I think people are recognizing that more.
Yeah, I mean, the one reason for my question is the New York Times would choose one person and then do a feature-length story on it. That's why I ask, is this a multiplicity of people, and, do they go in different directions, and you're not really focused on one person as your so-called, confidential informer or as your, object of, study and reporting.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose so we've this group of young men, we've sort of stayed in touch with them, and there's a few families who we're hoping to see in Germany actually in a few weeks' time. And then the voluntary groups, there's definitely people that sort of fly in for a week, and we tend to not stay in touch with them, but the people that have been there consistently, we're very much friends with, I think. Yeah.
But it looks like the dynamic may change now, because just today, the last of the NATO warships arrived in the Aegean that they say will be patrolling the borders between Greece and Turkey.
Yeah.
Greece declared Turkey a safe country.
Right.
With the idea that they could say, you're a refugee, stay in Turkey, you're safe.
Yeah.
You don't have to come to Greece or go to Germany. And at the same time, Austria and other countries, Hungary has already done it, of course. They have a very reactionary government, has sealed their borders off to refugees. What do you think is going to happen? What would be the consequence of not allowing people to cross into Europe?
Sure. So actually it's happening now. The Turkish Coast Guard has started to turn back the refugee boats, and sometimes not in a nice way either. They've been using hoses and water to kind of push them back into Turkish waters and back towards the coast in Turkey. Because once they reach Greek waters, the Greek Coast Guard can then pick them up and bring them directly to Mytilene, to the camps, and then they can move on towards Europe. So they want to avoid the boats even entering Greek waters, because the Greek Coast Guard has been very good in picking them up immediately and avoiding all sorts of disasters. The volunteers on the ground there have started to see the NATO ships, and less refugees have been arriving, but they're not sure that it's so much because of the NATO ships, but more because of the weather. It's been very, very windy and very rough.
Right.
But it is huge that Greece has recognized Turkey as a safe place, because that means that they can just say, no, you have to stay back in Turkey. And that's big for Turkey as well, because they already have 2.2 million refugees there. I mean, how many more refugees can that one country handle?
Yes.
Even with 3 billion euros donated to that cause, it's not really sustainable.
Interesting.
Yeah. I think in Europe, European...
We're going to go to a couple of photographs. Yeah, but please,
yeah,
go
I was just going to
ahead.
say, European leaders, I think, in the last couple of days have sort of given a 10-day window to resolve all of this, and they say in 10 days...
You dignify them
Europe
with
will
that term,
fall.
leaders, but anyway.
So, it's coming to a crunch, but they have been saying that
Right.
since last October.
Right. Maybe we can show just a few of the photographs left, which are the onto Athens, the transit, yes, and there we go.
So
Very
these,
nice.
Yeah, these are refugees
And-
waiting to board the ferry to Athens. They get their tickets at the camps. They normally spend about 24 hours on Lesvos before taking the overnight boat into Athens, where they will then be taken to yet another camp and then shuttled up to the border with Macedonia. These are sort of more young men from Iraq who are fleeing war and conscription.
I think it's important to realize that these people that are fleeing from exactly what we are also afraid of.
And it's certainly not an army. There's a lot of children, 34% children who are coming over.
Oh, that's a great shot. Yeah.
These are the endless buses that they have to sort of endure and covered in plastic tape because,
Great. And if we could also move on to the what we're going to term vulture capitalism. There are only two slides.
Two
The
photographs
vultures at the end here.
Another scoop for
Yes,
MNN.
and Harriet's going to give us a commodity analysis of this. Yeah. So the last group, which there are only two slides, called vultures. If we have. Yes, there we go.
Yeah, so we've just got a couple of these. This is certainly a story that we're going back to report more on. As the boats come in, you've got a horde of volunteers running to help the refugees, and set a bit back from the crowd, a group of, some are Greek, some are gypsies, some are from Eastern Europe, sort of waiting on the banks of the shores there to deconstruct the boat. So once all the refugees get out, these teams move in and strip down the engines, take any excess oil and petrol or skin sort of valuable parts of the boat off, and then they go and sell them. They sell them within the island, within Greece, and
Rumor has
potentially, rumor has it, not verified by us as of yet. Also, there's some sort of recycling going back to Turkey as well. So
I see. Wow.
there's definitely a lot of connections between the smugglers on one side and the people on the other, in terms of there's a communication network now which is spreading information and
Excellent.
yeah.
It's really important to also note that the island of Lesvos is being overrun by refugees, like it or not, and the local population sometimes feel that they're losing out, and so the vultures kind of symbolize local Greeks taking back a little bit from the crisis as well. So it's benefiting them in a very, very small way, that they can go and deconstruct these boats and then sell for a very minimal price the oil or the engine.
The engine.
Yeah.
And no one
Primarily,
has ill will towards these vultures either. And actually, they break these boats down and take what they can, and then less is left for the cleanup, because there are volunteers specifically set out every morning to do the cleanup. And it's just another form of recycling. And so there's no one really on the island saying these people shouldn't be doing this.
Yeah, and I think no one sort of accuses them of being opportunists, or
Right.
and it's like within the camps there are food trucks that have set up, and there are sort of local Greeks who have, been able to sort of build their businesses effectively around the crisis, which again, of course, is okay. And people forget that Greece itself is suffering, a horrific financial crisis,
Yes.
and they're not profiteering, and prices are very
right.
low, but it's just a sustainable free market economy, and that's okay. Potentially.
Interesting. Well, I think because, I really wish we had 2 hours today. We only have an hour. We're going to go ahead and show the video by Fahrinisa's brother, Hassan, now called Refugees Welcome, which was the title of our show today. It's about a 9.5 minute video, so we'll enjoy and watch it. No commentary, and then we'll come back and have a short discussion about that and wrap it up.
Perfect.
So, great. Good.
I'm down on my mind. One of the biggest mass migrations in the history of the world.
Taking Islamic refugees would be suicide.
Muslims coming from Muslim countries.
They're going to be radicalized.
Should we really be opening our doors at the risk of letting in terrorists?
I've got a 2-week travel break, so I just decided I'm going to head to Greece. I wanted to see if these people are like my news cycle tells me they are. Undesirable, jihadist, dangerous. I'm going to Greece.
What?
Dites-moi d'où il vient, enfin je saurai où je vais. Maman dit que lorsqu'on cherche bien, on finit toujours par trouver. Elle dit qu'il n'est jamais très loin, qu'il part très souvent travailler.
30, and the 60, it's 600.
There's absolutely no one here, no security. I rented this bad boy, biggest van they had. The streets are pretty empty now, but when I was driving through town, it's all refugees, wrapped in blankets. I couldn't even get my car through at some points. Finally, I found the hotel. I'm here now. Morning shift early tomorrow. I have no idea what that means. I'm gonna hop in my van, see what I can do.
Oh, it's 5:45. I don't know if you can hear that.
Please give your brother our good grades for such a nice little piece. And,
yeah, it's hard watching that.
Yeah.
He arrived the day after I left in October. So the end of October and November was when the most refugees came, 5,000 to 8,000 a day. And so every half an hour you'd have rescues like that, people falling out of boats. It was desperate. There were people washing up on shore every morning. And for him to go blindly as well, I just said, you know, this is where I'm staying. You need to come here and you need to do your work. He's a self-taught filmmaker. That was what happened after a week there.
Right. Harriet, any comments on this?
I mean, I've seen it. I've watched it now, sort of.
Be wrapping up in a minute or two. Yeah.
We both get pretty emotional, and yeah, it's a really tough thing to watch. And he did an incredible job, and we're looking forward to going back and telling more stories, I think.
What do you think explains why the many, not of course all Americans, but many of the Americans are afraid of the refugees, and also in Europe? It's not only an American phenomenon. There are many, many peoples in Europe who do not want the refugees.
But it's, I mean, even the, you know, the reference to the Immigration Act, even at the turn of the sort of 19th century, there were horror stories in the press about Western women getting attacked by immigrants coming over, and obviously we're seeing the same situation again in Europe, especially with the Cologne attacks over New Year's Eve, and all this scaremongering and fear, and the Paris attacks, which, you know, as we now know, there were, well, one of the theories is that it was sort of a propaganda sort of attack effectively by ISIS to directly have this sort of effect. And like Hassan says in the video, I just beseech anyone just to come and meet these people, because I don't believe even Donald Trump standing on the shoreline of Lesvos could say the things that he's saying when those people are landing.
We're going to unfortunately have to end here. We definitely want you to come back, and we're going to wrap up. Thank you very much, Fahrinisa and Harriet, for joining us today.
Thank you for
we're going to
having
end, I hope, with a clip, and we'll hopefully see you very soon again after your next trip. Thank you very, very much. This is Michael Pelias for The Radical Imagination with my co-host Peter Bratsis. And thank you for viewing, and thank both of you again for informing us of, you know, the other view of the island. Thank you.